to identify trading opportunities. I'm Bill Townsend. I'm the MD for North American Power, and I lead a team here at Genscape that's responsible for our real-time power products. And today I'll be joined by Brian McIntosh and Rush Milan, who are two of the lead analysts in our market intelligence unit, who take this data that we'll look at today, this power flow data, and use it to analyze the PJM and MISO markets each day. So we'll start out, and I'll talk a little bit about where this data comes from and how we create these data sets on power flow, and then Brian and Rush are going to take us through a series of examples of specific instances where they looked at the data and identified opportunities for trading. At any time during the presentation, you can open the panel on the left, and there is a window for asking questions. We'll definitely leave time at the end to address questions, and anything that doesn't get addressed, we are happy to do follow-up via email or telephone on a one-on-one basis. So thank you again, and let's get going. So today we're going to talk about where this data comes from and how we deliver that to our customers now through the PowerRT interface. We'll introduce to you the new interface that layers the transmission and generation together, and then we'll go through those examples on how to use this for dart spread analysis, analyzing the impact of outages, and looking at the use of our alerting system and watching these throughout the day to get a sense of when things are likely to bind in the real-time market. So first, let's talk about where the data comes from. Genscape has been using EMF detection technology for about 13 years in the United States and Europe to monitor the output from power plants. In the last 3 years, what we've done is repurpose that same technology, but to measure the direction and the magnitude of power flow on those transmission lines. So we've been building out that network beyond the generating capacity to more lines that are interties, part of constraints or flow gates where there are often constraints that move market prices or influencing them. So at this point, we've got over 1,500 lines now with real-time flows. In addition to that, we use infrared sensing technologies on power plants, especially in areas where we can't get near the transmission lines, so urban areas where there are underground lines or underwater lines. Oftentimes we use infrared cameras. Additionally, at facilities where there are multiple fuels, if there are gas and coal units co-located, and we want to be able to see the output differences when those gas units are ramped up or the coal units are ramped up, we can get unit-level depiction of those resources using infrared. And then lastly, we monitor the grid frequency. We have over 100 monitors in the 3 interconnects in the U.S., and we use those to detect unplanned outages, estimate the magnitude and the approximate location of the facility. Using all these technologies together is something that we've made great strides in the last couple of years. We continue to advance the technologies. In fact, this year we are now in experiments with our EMF technology trying to monitor transmission lines where there are multiple circuits or multiple lines in the same right-of-way and be able to extract those and see those individually, which will expand our capability to monitor more facilities and more rights-of-way. Additionally, on frequency monitoring, we've been looking at our signals, looking for the ability to monitor voltage from those monitors, as well as also looking at loss of load events or transmission line outage events. So we don't sit still. The technology continues to evolve over time. And to that end, we're deploying it in a strategy where we're working our way downstream from our traditional real-time monitoring of just power supply. As I mentioned, we're actively monitoring transmission, and we've got a few experiments, and we'll expand this in the coming year for real-time demand. So we're looking at some industrial load monitoring, looking at monitoring metropolitan area load pockets that are smaller than an ISO zone, but significant loads that often create congestion events or surprise load events, and then loss of load events when load trips offline, being able to detect that and tell you where and how big that is. So how do we deliver this to our customers? Many of you probably have PowerRT up right now if you're real-time trading. We've just released a new interface to give you a lot more control over the content in terms of being able to see the data in charts and tables, create custom alerts. To that, we have added a layer of content called transmission RT. It's delivered through the same platform, and that is the primary way we're delivering our content to the clients. All of these data, though, do have an option to receive a data feed. So that's the product plug. With that, we'll start to move into how you can actually use this Power Flow data to look at the markets. And I will turn it over to Brian McIntosh, who leads our PJM desk here, to explain this first example.
So this first example here is looking at how the real-time flows play into day-ahead opportunities. And to illustrate this, I want to look at the Kincaid to Lanesville line, which is the monitor shown on the lower left-hand corner of the screen here. And this line was originally scheduled to be out of service the 23rd of September through the 27th at 1700. Now, the impact here is we did see painted transformer congestion in the real-time and day-ahead driving upside on Hill Hub. Now, if you were looking at this outage, you would expect that that coverage would carry over through the duration of the outage there on the 27th, which is what we saw, keeping Hill Hub at a premium to Indy. However, if you look at the actual flows on the line, you can see that that line returned to service early, midday on the 26th. So the impact here is that premium in the day ahead wasn't expected to be carried over until the real time there on the 27th. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw Indy actually come in at about a $3 premium over Hill Hub.
Great, thanks. That was actually Rush who heads up one of our analyst teams on the MISO desk. He's going to fill in some more on a couple minutes on some MISO wind opportunities that we saw. In terms of the second example that we have, we're going to look at a few PJM opportunities here. The first position that, or the first opportunity that we saw on the PJM side, and a lot of our customers were able to identify this as well, was in the Delmarva Peninsula region. As many of you know that look at PJM, that can be a very sensitive area, and when the lines congest down there, the DPL zone as well as the East Hub itself have significant separation from the remaining zones and hubs in PJM. What a lot of our customers and our analysts here at Genscape were able to look at using the Trans-RT service was we monitored the Indian River to Piney Grove line, which had gone on outage. It's a low voltage line that flows from north to south, and what we saw is we had an outage that was scheduled to end on the 27th of September, just last month. And what we were seeing in the previous days is some very significant pricing for DPL and East Hub. For all those days, you'd see in the real time those two pricing points would go significantly above everything else, and there were some opportunities to trade those two positions. What we noticed in Trans-RT is the line returned to service about 4 hours earlier than anticipated, something that PJM still hadn't got to update the tickets on. And so what we were able to use the data for is to explain to our customers and for our customers to realize before the majority of other market participants is that the line returning resulted in the DPL price to drop by more than $30. And the East Hub would have been in a similar pattern. They just had another constraint that was occurring on the same day that kept the East Hub slightly propped up. But it's a good example of really an educational tool that our customers use to really understand what the kind of inner workings of the congestion are, and it gives you a much better picture of a really sensitive spot, especially on the PJM spot like DPL. The second example we wanted to touch on was, or the third example in PJM that we'll touch on is the Bagley to Grayston congestion that we have. It's a line again that flows north to south from just north of Baltimore into the downtown Baltimore region. And what you see is Baltimore is a kind of a load pocket there where there's definitely not enough generation to satisfy the demand. And so the Bagley to Grayston line has been and previously was Grayston to Raphael Road, has been a very sensitive path for PJM. And when you see that congestion, you see a significant upside to the West Hub, to the BGE zone, to the PEPCO zone and to the Dominion zone. So what we've had is we have monitors on the Bagley to Grayson line, and we've been able to identify kind of some key thresholds where we can set an alert and say, when the Bagley to Grayson line gets to X number, we see congestion more often than not. And so in the scenario that we have identified here is that you can see at a specific point that on the upper right-hand corner, you see Bagley to Grayson gets to a certain point where those red dots are, and the congestion occurred, and the West Hub ended up trading up by $1 to $5, and so you can see a significant movement in the West Hub price, and our customers were able to see that, within a minute to 15 minutes sometimes ahead of the market, and they can say. They can go ahead and say, okay, it looks like this line has a high probability of congesting. I can go ahead and use that data and that information to make some trades in the real time for the West Hub. The fourth example for PJM is really in terms of your long-term planning, and we look at the data we have, and we can use that to kind of make some more informed decisions about generation retirements. The example we have here is just last week, the Hatfield Ferry power plant retired 3 units, totaling 1,500 megawatts. And what we were able to do is we were able to monitor the flows from Hatfield Ferry. And what we could see is there were up to 1,200 to 1,500 megawatts of power flowing from that plant onto the Bennington-Black Oak interface. For those of you that don't know, the Bennington-Black Oak interface is one of the main paths in PJM that moves power from the western half of PJM into your more heavy load pockets of Baltimore, D.C., Northern Virginia, and Philadelphia. And so, by looking at by using the Trans-RT data, you could identify that there's a high probability that less power will flow across the Bennington-Black Oak interface during the times that Hatfield Ferry was running. With this the opportunity that this kind of outlines is more along you can use it for a short term and say, okay, I know tomorrow I should have less flowing on Bennington-Black Oak, but from more of a macro picture, you know that Bennington-Black Oak interface is responsible for serving your BGE, PEPCO, and Dominion. And so what I would say is that if you do get some colder temperatures, or especially some hot temperatures in this coming summer, that those load zones are going to need to pull generation or find generation from somewhere else. And more likely than not, that generation that's going to need to be called on is going to be more expensive than a unit like Hatfield Ferry. So it potentially could drive up your prices in BGE and PEPCO. Another example of her generation retirements that we used this data for was your ATSI. A lot of you saw the old First Energy utility zone, now ATSI and PJM, had a few days in late July where there was some significant upside to ATSI. We were able to look at some of the generation retirements that went into place in ATSI and realize that there was going to be some significant stress put on some of the low voltage lines that flow around Lake Erie, and that was one of the things that came through in the mid to late July time frame. So it's a good tool that a lot of our customers have found a lot of value in monitoring these lines, and I definitely think the alerting features that people have put in place on this Indian River to Piney Grove and this Bagley to Grayson have also helped out your real-time opportunities. I'm going to pass it back over to Rush. He's got one more MISO example to pass on, and then we'll finish up with Bill.
So for this next example, we're going to look at the impact of wind on constraints. So in MISO, the wind really can impact some of these constraints. And for this example, we're going to look at the Lucas area and I guess the lack of wind seen there on October 7th. So if you look at the bottom left-hand chart, it's basically tracking the real-time wind generation there in the morning of the 7th versus the MISO day-ahead forecast. And if y'all look now at the right chart, we have a couple of lines around the Ottumwa area. The first of which, represented by the purple line, is the Bondurant Montezuma 345 kV. And you can see that the typical flows on this are west to east, and those flows are represented on the left hand of the chart there. Now the general trend here, you can see as the wind starts to decrease, the flows on that line decrease, and actually by hour ending 10, the flows have reversed. And that's kind of another neat thing about this. You can see the reverse of the flows. So the flows are typically stated in direction of the name. So if you see the negative starting to go towards the west here, or towards that Des Moines area. The other line here is the Ottumwa-Lucas 161 kV line. And you can see at the same time that the Bondurant flows are going towards Des Moines, those Ottumwa-Lucas flows are at its peak. So the neat thing here is that's when we started seeing this congestion, that Lucas congestion driving the downside there on Ottumwa. And not only can you set a custom alert on, say, the Ottumwa-Lucas line at about that 60 megawatt level where it was at, but you can also do this with a variety of other lines in the area, and you can also match this up against, say, output there at Ottumwa. Now, we use this in our daily process not only to recap the previous day's congestion and kind of look into the drivers, but also looking forward, looking at certain constraints and seeing how they've interacted with wind and output at certain generators in the past. And talking to a lot of clients that are kind of using this, they're using it for the same purpose, to kind of look back at general direction and patterns to kind of get a threshold here. Now, one other thing to note is not only can you flag these constraints in transmission RT, but you can also export this data. So you can export it through like a CSV file into Excel, and then use this as part of your current process in any analysis that you might do.
Great, thanks a ton, Rush. Brian, thank you as well. Just to recap a little, what we looked at is the data coming from Power RT and Transmission RT. These are Genscape's proprietary monitors, and how these analysts are using it in their daily analysis of balance of day and the day-ahead markets. I hope we've given you some concrete examples of how that information can play into conditions that they talked about. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in or contact us afterwards. All of these slides will be posted on genscape.com, and at the conclusion of the webinar, you'll be asked to take a survey, and we'd appreciate any feedback that you can give us on this so that we can make these types of educational webinars concise, to the point, and delivering value that you appreciate. So thank you very much for your time. And I don't see any questions coming through, and I'm not sure if that's because my webinar screen's not set up right. But
yeah, Bill, we have a couple questions up here that we just saw. There's one question on New York flows and tie flows. And I can touch on that from the PJM side in terms of, for example, and yesterday would be a good example. We do look at a lot of the flows between PJM and New York, and I actually used the TransRT yesterday and was able to point some stuff out to some of the other customers that are currently using TransRT. In PSEG yesterday in Northern Jersey, we saw a constraint that came in at about 11 o'clock. It was Cedar Grove to Clifton. It came out. It was a somewhat surprising constraint. There didn't seem to be a lot of outages tied to it. But what we were able to do, and what our customers were able to do, is see. We looked at one of the lines that we had monitored, which is Roseland to Whippany, and you could take a look at those flows, and you could see that they had jumped up significantly from basically the whole week before. And you could also identify that there were, if you looked at the flows between PJM and New York, you could see that they had gone from about 300 or 400 megawatts flowing into New York to about 1,200 megawatts flowing to New York within an hour. And so we were able to kind of use all this data to kind of really understand where this congestion was coming from. So you could see the really strong flow on Roseland Whippany combined with some very strong some strong exports to New York. and you're able to identify some of this congestion in New Jersey, and it also impacted the New York interface price. So from a PJM point, that's what we can touch on. If you do have more questions about the New York interface or the New York high flows, we do have a New York desk here, and we'd be more than happy to put you in touch with our analysts over there that can give you some more ways that they're using the TransRT data.
So the next question coming.
I can see the question.
The next question coming is, can we explain the difference between using percentile and percentage limit, and which is more effective in monitoring when a line is going to be overloaded?
Yeah, so I think there's benefits to using both. I typically favor using the percentage of the limit. That's typically the best way for us to identify which lines are close to overloading. If you look at PJM, you can, similar to the interface screen on eData, I think a lot of people use it in a similar fashion to that. They look at the flow and they can compare it to the limit. So looking at the line as a percentage of the limit, that's really a good indicator of seeing where some of the most sensitive pieces are. It's also easier to identify the really at-risk spots because there's only a handful of lines that are going to be very close to their limit. So when you use the tool and it's showing the percentage limit, you only get maybe 3 to maybe 10 at the most that are really close to the limit. And that way you can really zoom in on where the really sensitive area are within the region that you're looking at. I don't know if Rush has any different.
No, I kind of agree. There have been certain lines we have noticed that it actually works well to do a set megawatt level, just not only for congestion, but just to kind of notice a general change in the flow. But I agree with Brian on using the percent there. So the next question is, what is the refresh rate for the line flows?
Why don't I take that one?
Yes.
In general, each monitor that's out in the field has a set schedule. They typically are set for 30 minutes, but we can configure them to higher frequency. And each one of those monitors has a piece of firmware within it that detects sudden changes, or what we call a transient event. So if there is an event where the flow either reverses direction or changes by a significant amount, that monitor will call up and send a data point in immediately. So under very normal conditions, you'll see about every 30-minute intervals on the readings. If things start to get exciting on that line, you'll get more frequent readings.
Okay, so thanks. The next question here is asking about our price forecasting and whether or not it includes these events.
Yeah, so one of the things we use our the transmission data for is we pull in the historical flows into our model, and we're able to use all of the historical flows to make sure that when we're actually modeling whether it's the BAL day or the next day, that our flows in the model match the actual flow, or they're in line. So if you have a line that is moving 200 megawatts of power across it, we ensure that for the rest of the day we're in line with that kind of range of what it's been flowing at. So we do use this data for modeling, and it's been actually an extremely helpful tool. And I know a number of our customers do some modeling on their own as well. And so this has been some good data that they're able to pull in and really make sure that the flows that they're using in their models kind of align with what's really happening out there.
So the next question coming to us is, does transmission RT work for, say, in ERCOT and then in California?
You bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And we touched on the PJM and MISO for this webinar. I think just because there are we have a lot of coverage there, and that's where a lot of the congestion component can be really dialed into for those regions. But Bill, you can touch on it. We monitor a significant amount of lines in ERCOT, I know, and in California as well. That
you bet. And we're active. We're active in all the regions. You know, one of the things I should mention is the way we decide to put a new facility into the interface is, you know, we go through a process where if it's a customer requested or we have multiple customer requests, it goes to the top of the list. After that, we talk to Brian and Rush and the other analysts that cover all of the ISO regions that we do our forecasting on, and we get their input on what they think is market moving now, what's likely to be market moving the next season ahead. And then we also do analysis on all the real-time binding constraints and just look at the historical frequency, the number of hours that something is binding, what the contingent elements are, and what the shadow prices have been, and use that as a way to prioritize what we're going to put monitors on. And we're actively, we deploy between 10 and 30 a month. So the network's growing pretty consistently over time.
So this next question is asking whether or not there is access to historical line flow data.
Yes, definitely. Through the when you drill down in the product to look at a detailed facility, you can plot up to as many years as we've had a monitor in the ground there. So in some cases, if it's a major transmission corridor or a generator connected line, we might have 13 years of you know, data on that facility that you can look at. So you can do things like look at year on year, pretty straightforward by charting it and then exporting it to Excel or some other program that Rush mentioned before when he was doing his analysis on wind.
Yeah, and I think I'm just, for example, we're doing a webinar on the Branchburg to Ramapo outage in I think next week, or actually Thursday. If anyone would like to join. We have, and one of the things we did there is, I mean, we monitor that Branchburg to Ramapo flow, and for our analysis on it, we looked back at previous outages, and we were able to look back for a year or so back, and we were able to look at when the Branchburg Ramapo line went out, what the impact was on New York flows, what the impact was in northern Jersey, and it helps us helps us understand what's going to happen, and it helps, you know, the customers get a feel for what they can anticipate happening in the coming months. Yeah, I think there's one last question on virtual and UTC trading and how this data can be used for that type of trading. And I definitely think it can, and it's kind of similar to what I was just touching on with the Branchburg Ramapo example. One of the ways that you can really look at it is you take the historical data. So you're still going through your research, you're trying to identify some of those sensitive spots for the next day to put a virtual or up to congestion trade on. And what you can do is you can use this data to help you confirm what you're thinking. And it also, it's a great educational tool. So you can say, okay, I understand this 230 kV line in Pepco is going out tomorrow. Let me see if I can use transmission RT to identify the last time the line went out. You can go ahead, you can look back and say, okay, it went back out on these last 3 times, and then you can look at the constraints that occurred on that day and say, okay, this looks like a high probability that you're going to see some congestion due to this outage, or it might confirm that it may have you rethink what you were the position you were planning on taking, and it may save you an opportunity there. So I definitely think the data that's showing on TransRT has some really good uses for virtual and UTC trading. I think that wraps up the questions, Bill, unless you had anything you wanted to add.
No, I think we probably got more questions than we were able to answer, so you're welcome to send those to us in email form. Again, the slides will be posted on genscape.com, and please complete the survey if you have some feedback for us. Additionally, you can, if you want to take a look at any of the products we've talked about, Power RT, Transmission RT or the Power IQ forecasting and analysis service, just contact us through genscape.com, and we'll be happy to show you those products individually or give you a trial and discuss those services. Thank you very much for joining us today.